going to give you Alexa and Josh, our two champions from Ocean First Institute, who are going to talk to us about plastic and what we can do to help minimize our contribution to the environment. Right? Thank you guys. You're amazing.
Of course.
So, take it away. Take it away.
Thank you. And so, yeah, Amy gave us a bit of an introduction, but my name is Alexa Hoffman. I am a research scientist here at OFI, OF's nonprofit research counterpart. And
my name is Josh Saul. Also research scientist. Alexa will tell you more about her background, but my background is also with sharks. My work has been mostly to understand how we use them as a resource, specifically with their liver oil. So we actually, interestingly, use their liver oil for all kinds of stuff, from supplements to sunscreen. And so my work was kind of understanding how we use that and how we can better protect them by finding alternatives, which is actually in very high numbers. Everything from plants to bacteria and yeast, you can produce the same ingredients from sharks that you can use to put in cosmetics. So yeah.
And he's leaving out a big one too. They're in vaccines.
Also in vaccines. Thankfully, not in any of the big COVID vaccines, but they are in some vaccines, which is pretty crazy.
Sharks are?
Well, an oil taken from shark livers. Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah.
And like Josh said, I am also a shark biologist, and I've done more of the spatial ecology side of things, looking at community relationships down mostly in the Bahamas. And aside from all of that, we are also educators at OFI, and a large part of our education this year has been on microplastic pollution. So that kind of leads us into our presentation today, Summit to Sea, the Journey of Plastic. Oh. Okay, there we go. So what is plastic pollution? Anyone give me a definition? I'm gonna ask you a lot of questions, by the way. This is how I teach.
It can be very interactive.
Yes.
Okay. All that crap.
Yeah.
So eloquent, Rhonda.
And well, one component of this is, do you know what plastic is made of, where it comes from?
Oil.
Yeah, petroleum. So, plastic pollution is in the best interest of big oil, because if you produce more plastic, you are giving more money to big oil. So just keep in mind. But back to
more
plastic
to say
pollution.
On that, Josh and I could go on forever. But so basically, it's the accumulation of plastic objects and particles in Earth's environmental sphere. So everything from the ocean to our atmosphere. It's been found in Mariana's Trench all the way to the top of Everest. It has entered the water cycle, which is greatly unfortunate, but therefore is something we really all need to know about. Thankfully, it is coming to light, but typically the solution side of things are not. And so here in Colorado, we are removed from the ocean, right? And at least that's what, you're shaking your head, which is the exact response that I want from this. So we feel removed is the better way to put it. And so we're kind of here as an institute to let people know that that's not the case. And especially with this in regards, every river leads to the ocean. And yeah. So does anyone know what is in this picture?
It's not TV static.
It's one item.
Really?
It's one item repeated many, many times.
Water bottles.
It's yes. So this is a picture of cigarette butts, which are the number one thing that is collected in ocean cleanups across the globe, which is pretty disgusting. So not only are they the actual particle themselves, the butt, but they also release a lot of toxins, right? So it's a filter, and when that enters water, then it enters the water as well. And therefore, when someone or something eats it, then that also enters their system as well. So number two, we do have plastic water bottles, food wrappers, plastic bottle caps, straws, other plastic bags, glass beverage bottles, plastic grocery bags, metal bottle caps, and plastic lids. And I think, obviously these numbers are so crazy high, but I still think that this is crazy, the fact that it's almost double. And yeah, so this is stuff that's picked up yearly, and it's pretty messed up.
Yeah.
I'm surprised you don't have big plastic bottles, like, I'm thinking like the detergent bottles.
Oh,
and
yeah.
stuff, because
Yeah.
I've actually started using, there's a company called Drops, and their whole thing is eliminate the jug. And they sell their little pods, which are completely dissolvable and full of some environmental laundry cleaning. So in a really cool little cardboard box that can obviously be recycled. And so
Yeah.
it's such a great company.
It is, and so that actually, we'll get to that at the
Okay,
end of the
sorry.
presentation, because we have our own samplers that Josh has worked with other companies, kind of putting together products that will help eliminate plastic in our daily life. So thank you for bringing that up. All right, and so the question is, why is it so common? Why is plastic pollution so common?
Plastic is everywhere.
All
Yeah.
rivers lead to the ocean, and it's in everything, right? So Josh brought up the fact that it's made of petroleum, which is huge for this fact. So if I don't know if people know this, but oil companies have actually lobbied for recycling because it allows them to produce so much plastic for so cheap and put it in everything.
Right.
But while still making the consumer feel like they're doing something by recycling.
Right. And part of the process of recycling, especially for certain material that may be pretty durable, is that you actually have to produce more plastic and input it into the old plastic to make it reusable. And so recycling isn't infinite, which is unfortunately a misconception, and it's made that way. We're kind of intentionally uneducated about plastics in general because it benefits many people who profit off of it. So yeah, it's pretty crazy.
Yeah, so that is why it's so common. So it's seen everything from balloons floating in the ocean to obviously huge nets left over from commercial fishing.
And that mask down there, I mean, unfortunately, COVID has created a serious situation.
Yeah.
I know hospitals already
Oh,
have
yeah.
so many, but you see masks everywhere. It's
Yeah,
disgusting.
totally. Yeah, and waterways. I mean, we've seen so many in waterways, and it's interesting because we'll talk a little bit more about this later. But our microplastics project we've done this last year with a bunch of high schools, we would find these fully intact masks in waterways, and when we would sample and analyze microplastics, we'd find these little blue fibers that look just like they came from a mask. So it's really interesting.
And obviously it's a hard balance too, because keeping the population
Right.
healthy, and but there is still proper ways to dispose of things, and we can do the best we can to make sure that it doesn't end up in places like the ocean. So here is a diver too, taking a plastic bag off of a reef. And so there's a couple of different things about aquatic plastic debris and debris in general that we tend to think about when we think about plastic pollution.
Well, those look like jellyfish, so then turtles eat them.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And so the two different things that I'll mention is the first one is we think about buoyancy. So that is the ability or tendency for something to float in water and air or some sort of substance or solution. And then the second is degradability. So as a lot of you probably know, plastic never actually fully degrades, but in this context, we will use it in terms of thinking about the way a plastic item does break down back into its original little nodes, or they're called nurdles. And so it's something we think about in general too, because a lot of times when we think of plastic pollution, we think about it on the surface, and that's not how plastic pollution exists in the water column or in the environment in general.
Yeah.
And so here's a fun little activity. So this is, like I mentioned before, what we consider something degrading, and this is a plastic fork. Does anyone have any idea how long this process took or takes? This is sped up, obviously, for a picture's sake, but normally would take
100 years, 50 years, I don't know, a long time.
Actually, you nailed it. So it's 100 years.
Oh, it's terrible.
Yeah. And it's crazy, right? Because way at the end too, obviously you see it's the same amount of material.
Right.
It's just been broken down and made easier to travel throughout the ecosystem in our bodies, like bodies of other animals, and so
it's very distinct from decomposition because it's not actually being broken down, turned back into soil. It's really just breaking down into smaller parts, which is really, really crazy.
Yeah. And this is obviously like some sort of an estimate because it has to do with where that object is. So a lot of things will be weathered down further by the sun through also chemical weathering as well. Things in landfills have slightly different life cycles. But yeah, so kind of a basic 100 years is what we say. And so at the end too, or actually I can talk about it right now.
Yeah.
So we have some objects up front too. This is an activity we do with our students a lot. And so I've laid out a couple more objects. So here is a glass bottle, and to degrade, it takes about 1 to 2 million years. But I will say one thing about glass is it is infinitely recyclable. So you don't need to add any more glass to it for it to retain its same structure, which is good.
Yeah.
So glass is good, even though that's
Value of
crazy.
glass is actually going to go up because sand is becoming a scarce commodity.
Yeah, that's right.
Which is crazy.
Yeah.
Crushed glass can substitute for sand.
Sand.
Yeah, and so in thinking about our alternatives, maybe glass is good because it's not, pumping these bad plastics into the environment, but we still have to consider the impact that taking sand from our environment, such as the ocean, to make glass could pose.
Yeah.
So it's difficult. It's a difficult trade-off we have to really, learn.
And so another sort of infinitely recyclable is the aluminum can, which is good, and then this one takes about 80 to 100 years. But it's interesting, so the aluminum can takes that long, but aluminum foil never decomposes, never breaks down. So it has to do with the way that it's treated with chemicals that inhibits its ability to fully break down into smaller parts.
It seems like it, because we were in Isla Mujeres last August with Kathy G, and we were doing a beach climb, and there were just little teeny particles, probably because
Yeah.
of just the sun and the heat.
Mhm.
It just
So
kind of
it will break down into smaller pieces,
uh-huh.
but it's a matter, it has to do, like this has to do with more like chemical composition
Okay.
changing.
Sure.
And so chemically, this will not break down in the same way. Plastic bags, 10 to 1,000 years. It's a big range, but it has to do with the situation that it's in. Then you have your plastic bottles, 75 to 450.
Oh much.
And then
The worst.
the worst,
Yeah,
styrofoam, another never.
right.
So obviously it's very fragile and breaks, but like I mentioned before, chemically it never breaks down and it leaches out all of that chemicals that is used to coat it as well.
And so many restaurants, unfortunately, with COVID,
Yeah.
people picking food up.
Yeah.
Delivered is coming in styrofoam.
Absolutely.
It's hard. I've seen here in Colorado though, or at least in Denver, I don't know about, I assume Boulder too,
Yeah.
that
More eco
now
friendly.
but then also you have to request at least cutlery and stuff.
Yeah.
And they won't just give it to you.
Yeah.
So there are some things that are
Yeah.
slowly happening, but like we said, like every little thing matters because that one fork that you're not getting anymore isn't going to take 100 years to break down.
So question on this 100 years though, because I just kind of just through testing in the lab where you kind of simulated 100 years, or do you know?
Yeah, so the kind of degradability that you get is from essentially like environmental conditions, which would be things like heat, sunlight, weathering, like erosion, maybe battering against rocks. And so what these studies do is they kind of try to speed up that process by making it a slightly more intense heat or slightly more increased weathering that you might expect over a certain amount of time. And so they can kind of get like an estimate of date for how long it really took.
Yeah, and also too, so chemicals and different compositions have different lives.
Mhm.
So they can look at the chemical compound structure of an object and be able to understand just by knowing that composition how long it'll take to, half and quarter.
Right. Like half-life, if anyone's familiar with chemistry, which we won't get into because
Yeah,
it's very in the details, but
we're more sharp people.
yeah.
And so then this brings us to our three main types of plastic pollution. So we have our macroplastics, our microfibers, and of course our microplastics. Sounds like everyone knows
Mhm.
and has become more of a thing. And so Josh, you want to say anything about any of these three?
Yeah, so microplastics are scientifically defined as any piece of plastic that's 5 millimeters in length or less, which is a pretty big spread. So if it's 5 millimeters or anything smaller, which can get to pretty small, they get into what are called nanoplastics, which are like very, very, very tiny. And those are the things we see, we've seen recently where they're in people's blood, in their lungs. They're so light and so small, they can like travel across cells and all kinds of crazy stuff. And so that's generally microplastics. And microfibers, at least from our observations, really seem to be probably some of the most common, because we have so much fabric that is made of synthetic material, from masks to tablecloths to shirts, that break down. And also in our microplastics project, it was the most abundant thing we also found in waterways.
And so, like every time you put your fleece through the wash, that is then releasing those microfibers into the water.
It's great. It's like, I think there was some statistic that was out there that was like a single shirt, that's, a synthetic shirt, can probably leach out about 200,000, microfibers per wash or something, which is absolutely crazy. Yeah. And there are ways to combat this though, which we will talk about.
Also, there's a lot of those body products, like the wash where it's got the little beads in it and stuff, and that's just
like the exfoliating beads.
Yeah.
I refuse to buy any of those anymore.
Yeah.
It's so bad.
Yeah, good thing there's more alternatives coming on the market all the time, which is good. But you're right. But like we said before, a lot of this stuff is hidden to the consumer as well.
And it's intentionally that way.
Which is intentional.
Right.
So obviously we've talked about plastic pollution. So now we're going to bring the presentation more into the journey itself. And so that's going to start here in Colorado. And so what is a watershed? Anyone ever heard this term before? Or
I'm a hydrogeochemist.
Oh. Well, do you have a good definition for us?
A watershed is a constrained geographic area that conveys water to a single discharge point.
Yeah. That's
Yes.
perfect. Yeah.
Yes, and for and so on a more basic level, it is an area of land that drains into some body of water in some way. And so a lot of times this is kind of marked off by different geological barriers. So a really good example I like to use, and you probably can correct me on this if I get this wrong, but theoretically, every drop of water that falls on the eastern side of the continental divide will end up in the Mississippi and then therefore in the Gulf. And then technically or theoretically, every drop of water that ends on the west side will end up in the Pacific Ocean, whether that's through the Rio Grande or the Arkansas, I believe.
Right, and much of it has to do with elevation.
Colorado. Thank you.
Yeah. And much of it has to do with elevation. So, we have gravity, thankfully, and water flows down with gravity. And so I forgot exactly what mountain it is, like Mount Elbert or something like that in Colorado, that is right on kind of the edge of one of these barriers. And so there could be like raindrops on, a few inches apart on this mountain that would flow into different watersheds, which is really cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so obviously this also is at different scales. So it can be everything from your backyard, looking at something so micro,
right,
to looking at the Mississippi watershed, which is over 33 states, us being one of them. And so it's really important to think, because everything that touches the surface, water related, and everything we put on the land ends up in our water somehow. So this is a good diagram to show that. Do you have? Oh, thank you. Got a thumbs up.
Perfect. A plus.
So have we found microplastics in precipitation though too?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
So here in Colorado too, it's been found in snowpack, and so it's been uptaken in the water cycle. Typically, that's microfibers, where they're a little bit lighter. But yes, they've entered the water cycle, so no area is left untouched.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. And so this kind of brings us to why watersheds are so important. So obviously, water is life. It drives everything in our cells, all the way to different ecosystems we have. The amount of water in an ecosystem just determines pretty much everything about it, all the way from the lack of water to our more desert ecosystems to our more wet ecosystems, such as the ocean, or even rainforests. And so there's a couple of different things that these watersheds do. And so we like to separate them at a basic level to their hydrological functions and their ecological functions. So kind of the first one I like to talk about is water storage. So when it rains or snow melts after it has snowed, that water then enters the land somehow, whether it's through runoff that immediately then flows through a river or stream down some way, or it is stored in a water table or in the ground. And so these watersheds release water at different times, which is super important because then we wouldn't have water throughout the year. And so that is a huge function hydrologically of these watersheds. And Josh, do you have anything to add on that part?
No, that's good. Yeah.
Okay. And then for the ecological functions too, water obviously is a liquid that a lot of biological functions take place in. So a lot of chemical reactions within the body and out in nature too that are vital to animal and plant life and overall ecosystem health. And obviously water is a huge habitat contributor, whether that's having water sources for the animals that live in it or creating the environment itself.
And changing the environment, like
Mhm.
our floods
Yes,
in
absolutely.
2013 here, and I was just in Yellowstone as the
Oh,
flood
yeah.
was
Oh, yeah.
happening because my son's going to school in Bozeman. We're driving across the Yellowstone, and it shouldn't be this high.
Mhm.
And by the next day, there was so much
Yep.
flooding, and it's like, why can't we redirect some of that water here to Colorado where
Yeah.
we need it? Or
Yeah.
it's always in the wrong place.
Mhm.
So I told my son, go to law school and become a water attorney because
Yeah.
we kind of need to do that.
Yeah.
I know, and especially here in Colorado, as we all know, water is a very political subject. It has a lot of
Absolutely.
water, a lot of laws surrounding it, and is a really important resource because we're not the only ones that use our water, and that water is also disappearing.
And Arizona's stealing the Colorado before it even gets to California. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's wild. That could be a whole other like 3 presentations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, exactly. And so then it kind of brings us to then what makes a healthy watershed. So kind of 3 main things that I like to think about is the high connectivity, which has anyone ever heard of, sorry, my eye. Has anyone ever heard of the term of habitat fragmentation? So basically it's a phenomenon that happens when there is a habitat that has been fragmented, whether that's through urbanization or a road, but basically what it does is it inhibits those animals or those different parts of the ecosystem
Right.
from being connected. So a big thing that does connect an ecosystem is the water. And when you break that up, you break up migratory paths and a bunch of other things.
Yeah,
And just
it
like
kind
the
of-
way nutrients transfer from throughout the system.
Yeah, it kind of in effect creates islands of habitat. So if you think of, even if it's a, land mass, it's kind of an island where you can't, if you're, an animal, for example, you can't exactly leave it to do something you might normally do that would help you survive, like migrate.
So a really good example, we've done that pretty significantly into like most areas, but a big one is the Great Plains of the United States. So there's very few places now that, like for example, like Buffalo roam, and they used to be everywhere, and that our whole middle of the United States was one giant ecosystem. And it's also good to think about, like even here in Colorado too, like national parks are a really good example of places that are kind of islands in some way. And Colorado is a little bit better about that. We are typically more outdoor driven people and kind of understand our connection a little more to our backyard. But yeah, so connectivity is huge for having a healthy watershed. And then another one obviously is low pollution. And then the last is dynamic movement. So this reminded me of what you said about the Boulder flood. And so the Boulder flood was really interesting because that was technically something natural that is supposed to happen. And when it flooded, it retook its original path that it naturally should be. And so water likes to take the path of least resistance. And so what we've done as humans is like to play God, essentially. We were like, okay, we want to develop here. the river is going to go here. So when it flooded, the river went, nah,
No.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so a natural healthy system in a river oftentimes meanders. So if you'll see, like, oftentimes driving through the mountains here, when you see kind of like a little valley and you see just like a really windy river, that is an older river that's been around for a long time. And that floodplain, it over time will migrate throughout that entire valley. And having all those twists and turns also creates different ecosystems within the river itself. So having all those different parts to that river is really important for the overall river health. And so that dynamic movement is super important for that reason.
Yeah, and just as an interesting side note, but still related, according to the EPA, watershed or healthy watershed is very, very uncommon now. And we probably don't really need them to tell us that because, I mean, just, based off of these 3 big points, we already know we have so much pollution. We have so much, lack of connectivity from our roads and other kinds of systems. So it is unfortunate that most of them are likely unhealthy, but we still have a lot of work being done to protect them better.
Yeah. And there's still things we can do in our backyard, our mini watersheds.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, as we all know, all rivers lead to the ocean. So the question is, then once that plastic and pollution travels from Colorado and ends up in the ocean, how does it get everywhere? It's been found in the most remote areas of the ocean too. And so that has to do with ocean circulation. So in the ocean, we have 5 main gyres where we have these large circulations driven by temperature, the equator here, and then the poles here, being thrown off a little bit by global warming as we don't have as cold areas. We definitely have really hot areas now. So a big one we like to think about is the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. How many of you have heard of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch? Yeah, all nods and hands. That's what I expected. And so this is a good map of it. And so a lot of times people are like, oh, it's the size of Texas. Technically, it spans from the coast of California to Japan and everything in between.
Plenty of it in Bandit. Yeah, we were doing a Bandit sea crossing in Indonesia.
Oh, geez. Yeah.
It's wild. And so, it's not an island. It is basically soup. And so this brings back what we're talking about plastic pollution with the buoyancy and degradability. So it is found it's pollution that is found throughout our entire water column.
Yeah.
All the way from the Marianas Trench, which not so fun fact. One of our coworkers is a deep sea biologist, and he's worked a lot with submersibles, and submersibles can no longer go to the bottom of the Marianas Trench because it is so full of debris. It's not necessarily all plastic. A lot of it is just like cables and machinery and just like a lot of heavier things that have slowly over time slid down. Pretty sad.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It also gets caught in the Sargassum too.
Yeah.
It just creates more of a mess.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's another really difficult thing with this, which is it's still a habitat for lots of species. And so we can work as hard as we want to clean it up, but we might also be removing those species that are not living there. And so it's a very, very difficult task. And, it's a very difficult task to clean this up as, as some people are trying. But again, like Alexa said, the soup aspect of it where it is now sinking because the buoyancy will diminish over time makes it even more difficult because we probably couldn't fully remove all that trash if we tried.
Yeah. That's exactly a good point. Like we have this almost the same presentation to our students, and they are all so gung-ho about getting nets out there, or they're like, we'll put a big magnet in the ocean. We're like, plastic isn't magnetic, but yeah, we like the energy. But like Josh was saying, not that simple.
When you're muck diving and you turn something over and there's 500 little creatures.
Exactly.
And the open ocean is a complex and amazing ecosystem. I've done most of my research on the open ocean, so I'm biased. But yeah.
Oh, and one more thing to add, I guess. And this is unfortunately, I guess this presentation is filled with not so fun facts. Plastic has a very interesting property where it's able to take things onto its surface. This is called adsorption with a D, AD. And so with this property, it can take on chemicals, heavy metals, as well as potentially harmful bacteria or other microorganisms. And so not only can it carry these bad things into the environment and leach them out, shed them into the environment, but if a fish or a sea turtle, for example, eats that, it can affect their biology. So it can affect their DNA. It can cause mutations. It can cause issues with fertility and with digestion. And so it's not just that the presence of this plastic is an issue, but it can also carry things with it. It's crazy.
I think the least fun fact out there.
The least fun fact.
Yeah.
We'll just call them sad facts.
Sad facts.
Yeah.
And so too, thinking about this as well. So going back to kind of the ways things circulate in the gyre, similar to, I like to use the comparison to a toilet. The water moves really quick around the outside, and then things in the center kind of settle and are kind of pushed in. So out here in Hawaii, there are a bunch of atolls out here that a lot of scientists are doing research on with different organisms and looking at the accumulation of plastic out there. One of them is albatross that they're looking heavily into, because there's a couple islands out there that's solely where they breed. And so later, if you all want to come up, we have a bolus of a juvenile albatross up here, and you can kind of like look through it, and it's pretty jarring because basically a bolus, if anyone's familiar with an owl pellet, it's them kind of regurgitating anything that they can't digest, and so scientists are able to look at this and understand how much of plastic they are just accidentally taking in. And it's pretty crazy. We've done this activity with our students for a really long time, and we've gotten a sample from an organization we've worked with that we're lucky to have it a sad but cool thing. That's what science is. Kind of sad but really cool. And just have to have a hopeful outlook on things.
Yeah. The good thing is that our albatross sample will never decompose, so we can have it forever. Show it to everybody.
Have it forever and ever.
Yeah, never.
So positive.
Yeah.
We just spin it.
And so that kind of brings us to this graphic. So also something interesting too about the garbage patch, like we said, it's a soup, but if you really are to break down what that soup is made of, almost about over 53% is what we call megaplastics, and that is primarily made up of commercial fishing gear. And what is the problem with abandoned fishing gear? Bycatch. Exactly. So that fishing gear does a really good job at being fishing gear because it keeps capturing things even after it has been abandoned. And fishing in general these days is non-discriminatory, so it already has a huge impact on bycatch when it is actively being used. So this passive way of capturing is extremely harmful, and then typically it's made of plastic, which then continues to shed. And then kind of it breaks it down further. Macroplastics 26%, mesoplastics 13%, and then microplastics about 8%. And I think this is crazy. 80,000 tons of garbage, and 99% of it is made of plastic.
Gross.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Gross. That's gross.
Plastics didn't even come about until what, the 50s or
Exactly.
60s?
So plastics were first invented in 1907, but they weren't really widespread until, like you said, the mid 1900s. Yeah.
So just based off of this degradability, technically every piece of plastic that's ever been made is still around today.
It's pretty sad.
Yeah.
So,
And much of it ends up in the ocean, as we know, because rivers lead to the sea.
and most things are not recycled because of lobbying and things that aren't actually recyclable are being put into recycle bins or not at all. So what are our solutions?
Yay.
I know, sorry.
We have some antidepressants for anybody who needs one. One on the side table.
It's called alcohol.
I told you. You looked at the bottle and you didn't buy it.
Next time I'm getting tequila, we'll get shots out.
Damn straight. If you're
Yep.
talking about plastics, we need tequila.
Perfect.
Yeah, exactly.
Drinking out of glass.
Absolutely. A shot glass or a big glass. An ocean first.
Yeah,
There you go.
honestly, next thing we should look into
Yeah.
ocean
Sorry.
shot glasses.
No, it's okay.
Oh no, this is we love this. This is how we like to teach and present, anyways, interacting with people.
Because usually we're teaching kids and we can't give them drinks.
You can't get
And so,
tequila.
right. And so it's usually a more difficult conversation.
And so solutions. So what I like to tell my students, our students, is, well, first of all, if you don't know about something, you can't care about it. So just by spreading this knowledge and talking about it, and as consumers who are purposely being hidden from these things, it's really amazing that we're coming out of the dark. Not all of this blame of our plastic use, or most of it, is not actually our fault. And it's something that we really can't avoid, but just talking about it is the first big step.
Yeah, I mean, we're very much subject to the reality we live in. So even if we try to reduce our impact, there's only so much we can do. And so this education is incredible because, there's so many people who just don't know about this issue. And especially in a place like Colorado, where we're not directly, within a couple hours of the ocean, it's difficult for people to kind of grasp the idea that we can have an impact from here. And so it is so incredibly important just that we have education, because it's awesome.
And that's how things, spread and things catch on. And that's when you start, going to your local ballots if you're able to vote, which you all are. And kind of putting people in office that will stand hopefully behind the things that need to change. And also, like I mentioned before, and that's why I like to use plastic as a really good example, because every piece of it matters so much that it is something so tangible that we all can contribute to in our daily lives, or not contribute to.
And Belize, it's not that wealthy of a country, but they have no straws that are not biodegradable because they rely on diving. And it's so great to go, to Belize and order a cocktail. It has a, corn-made straw.
Yeah.
Or something.
The Bahamas is the same way.
Yeah.
It proves we can make a change. We just really have to get like the mass movement going, or at least the politicians who have most of the power to make the change.
Hopefully, but at least just spreading by our own actions.
Right.
Makes a big difference.
Absolutely.
And so the other phrase I like to use when talking to our students and everyone about this issue is, the best way to stop this is thinking of a bathtub. So say you're walking into your bathroom, the tub is flooding everywhere. There's water everywhere. What's the first thing you're gonna do?
Turn off the water.
Turn off the water. So
We've had some people say throw towels down.
and then we're like, think about it. And they're like, oh. So turn off the water. Seems really simple. And so that is something that we can all do. So with this issue, like we were saying, it's hard to clean up a lot of those fine particles that are in the ocean for all the reasons we talked about before, or in the ecosystems all across the globe. But we can stop it at its source. So by every day making conscious decisions to take it out of our lives, all that stuff is not going into the system. Yeah,
and I mean, one thing I like to think about, because I grew up in Georgia where there's very little education on this. I started with my first, plastic-free thing was a metal water bottle, and I just started to think, if I were to drink 365 water bottles a year, I mean, that's an incredible amount. I mean, that is so many water bottles, and so just by doing something like that, just by switching to something like a reusable water bottle, you can make such an incredible difference.
And I think the cool thing about
right here.
yeah, exactly.
That's right.
A retail plug.
Where are those beautiful turquoise water bottles?
And so another thing, I think we kind of skipped ahead to our next slide.
Yeah.
Here's another good one. So conservation projects. So there are a lot of really amazing organizations doing the work out there to cleaning up as much as possible, because every piece of plastic matters. Also, taking out that plastic does really matter a lot as well. So there's some really cool organizations and I think you know a little bit better about these organizations.
So Save the Med, Save the Med and BraceNet on the far right are both very similar. Save the Med is more of kind of like an organization of divers who will go into the ocean, and they specifically target areas that are highly impacted by fishing nets or lost fishing nets, because they work really hard to release caught animals or living things from those nets. They remove them and throw them out. BraceNet does something similar. Surely they will let an animal free if it's caught in the net, but they take those nets and they upcycle them. They turn them into something else, because as we know now, they cannot degrade, they cannot break down or decompose. And so a BraceNet will turn them into things like dog collars and leashes, keychains, bracelets, and all other kinds of stuff. So at least it makes it so hopefully we will be able to reuse them, maybe not throw them out again, or at least they won't end up in the ocean like a net, which can cause significantly more damage.
And then 4Ocean, which I like the hat back there, 4Ocean hat. They are an organization I feel like a lot of us have heard of by now. They make the bracelets and stuff that help fund taking out plastic out of the environment.
Yeah. No, yeah, that's good.
And so along with these larger organizations, we do some stuff too.
Yeah.
And so like we mentioned before, we have a microplastics pollution solution project where we got a grant from the Science and Cultural Facilities District, where we work with 6 of the counties across the Front Range and go into public schools and pair up with primarily high school students in high school classes and do sampling in local waterways, and then so getting them involved in getting in the field and that science work, and we also then put them into the process of analysis and processing those samples. And Josh was our leader on this project, so if you have anything else to add about that.
Well, so this last spring was our first go of it, which was really awesome. We worked with I think 11 different high schools, couple classes per high school. And we'd visit each class about 5 or so times. It was really, really fun. And every single sample we collected, which was about 100 or so samples, we found microplastics in every sample. And this was in essentially in all around the South Platte River Basin, which is the watershed we're in right now, which leads to the South Platte River and eventually ends up to the Gulf of Mexico. And that was essentially a lot of different waterways from Castle Rock to Lyons. So it was a pretty big spread of all these different waterways where we found microplastics.
And the cool thing is this is going to be a long-standing citizen science project that we hope to only expand and find more ways to get people involved. So as an institute, we're looking to also expand our volunteer program. So if anyone is ever interested in volunteering to do any of this work, we're looking to organize more cleanups while also collecting these samples and adding to our hopefully ever-growing data set. And so the cool thing about this is there has been some papers shown that water treatment plants are a really good place to take out microplastics. But currently the infrastructure there is just not there, because it is something that's widely understudied, especially in smaller waterways all the way up in the Rockies and other areas. Like we said before, plastic pollution, you think of the ocean. You don't think about the stream or the gutter trickling behind your house. And so here's a short video about our project this past year with my face as the thumbnail. Oh.
See.
Oh no, do we not have sound?
No, it should be.
Well, I'll restart it.
It was working a second ago.
Well, this is a video on our YouTube. So
Check it out.
Yeah, so this is basically, we went out with one of our classes for the day, and we were lucky enough to take our videographer that works with Ocean First along with us to document the whole process and give a synopsis of our project while showing it all in action.
Yeah, and it was really fun. And I guess maybe we'll try one more time, and if not, we'll just continue on.
Great
We
montage.
had it raging right before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah, we could if it won't work, we can provide the link later as well for you guys if anyone's interested.
Or we can show it on the laptop.
Yeah, or we can try to lip sync the whole thing.
Yeah.
No, but yeah, it was.
I honestly think playing it though, you can see.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
so we're working with high school students in the field. We really train into the whole process. It's everything from kind of what we're talking about today to going in the field and taking samples and then analyzing it under microscopes. So it's really cool to be working with these students for multiple classes and showing them all the different methods that a real scientist would do.
And a lot of them also too kind of took spin-offs. Like they were the ones to choose the sites, looking at comparison between different areas around their schools. Some of them even like we worked with, especially this. So this is Silver Creek High School up in Longmont.
Yeah.
And we were working with a couple AP science students and their environmental club. And so a lot of these AP environmental students then took this and looked further into the samples and spent more time on it and turned it into their project for the end of the class. So which is super cool because that's kind of our goal in this, not only to collect the data, but to get kids out in the field feeling like they're connecting to their backyard and understanding all that connectivity that we talked about to the ocean. So here are some more samples being taken. Yes, we did have to use plastic bags in order to take the samples.
Yes. This next year we're going to use glass jars for all of it, for water and sediment, which will be better. And it was just a really incredible experience. We had a research symposium that was unfortunately virtual this year because of COVID, but we had as many students as were interested in join us, and we kind of debriefed on all that we did. We talked about solutions and their experiences over the course of the whole thing. It was just really, really cool. And I think this fall we're going to do it again, and we're hopefully going to have our symposium at a museum in Denver. I forgot the name.
The Museum of Nature and Science.
Yeah. And so
it'll be also the full year. So we just did this in the spring, but we already have teachers we're going to start in the fall now that we have the grant, and then we're going to go throughout the whole school year with them, which would be really cool.
Did you guys partner with the Innovation Center too?
So not for this, that's for our Red Belly Days project, but we did work with a lot of schools in Longmont and Boulder County. And so that's our microplastics pollution solution project. And then I'll leave Josh to talk a little bit about this part. So this goes into our own use of materials.
Yeah, and so, just a huge part of reducing your own impact on the environment through reduction of plastic is, using some alternative products. And this is something that we were able to do really cool, which I'll talk about. But there are so many alternative products out there now that are plastic free, or at least reusable plastic material that you can use on and on for everyday items. So I have all of these, but in the top left, these are reusable produce bags that are incredible. At least when I was in Georgia growing up, we would walk into the store and just grab like 20 bags of those little plastic produce bags to fill up your food. But in this case, you can just use a reusable one that is virtually weightless, so it doesn't really affect the cost of your produce. Some of them are scannable, so you can scan through them, and you can machine wash them. So it's all really, really good, and it saves a lot of plastic from going into the environment. There's also things like the reusable water bottle, which I talked about. On the bottom right, we have, which a lot of companies make these now. This is a perfect example, Earth Breeze. They make these things called eco sheets. And these are essentially plastic-free laundry detergent. So if anybody's familiar with Tide Pods, for example, the clear film on the outside that will break down in the washing machine is actually a dissolvable plastic. And so it can be really bad for the environment as it is just washed right into our waterways. So something like this is really great. It saves you money on water because much of our liquid detergent is just water-based. So it saves you money. And it's also just plastic free, and it comes in a biodegradable package. So it's like a little flat package that I think if you subscribe, it's like $12 every time you want one of these. And it's, I think, 60 loads worth of laundry, and you can get it essentially whenever you want. So
you also can rip them in half so you can technically have 100.
Yeah. And they're pretty strong, so I usually rip it in half. And yeah, so they're really awesome. There's a few different brands that make that. Is Earth Breeze, True Earth, Boulder Clean, which we're now partnered with, which is a really another cool organization that just came out with these.
Yeah, so here's
cool.
an example of one of the companies. But yeah, Josh, if you want to talk a little bit about our new partnership with Boulder Clean.
Yeah, so we, if anybody's familiar, there's this company organization in Boulder called Boulder Clean, and they make all kinds of things that are eco-friendly, lots of cleaning products. So these are things like spray bottles and tablets that you can drop into just, bottle of water to clean your surfaces, as well as these eco sheets. And so they are essentially selling these really cool eco-friendly products in stores like Walmart and Costco, and they are actually giving 1% of all their profits to us to help us with our research like this, which is really cool.
Yeah, and so it was first launched a month or two back with their new product with the cleaning tabs. And so those glass bottles you can get, have hammerhead sharks all over them to help fund our hopefully coming up soon hammerhead research down in our Key Largo lab location. And yeah, so it's a good way to replace items and support your local ocean nonprofit out here in Colorado.
And so this kind of all is just to say there's a lot of different things we can do. A lot of them, include spending money, but these are really good things that will technically save you money in the long run. From buying water bottles, from buying probably more expensive than it needs to be washing machine detergent, even toothpaste. But on that note, we were able to collaborate with a lot of different eco-friendly companies to make or put together what we call a sustainability sampler. So it's kind of this little kit, looks like this, that has a bunch of different eco-friendly products in it, including a reusable ear swab, reusable or kind of like plastic-free refillable makeup like this. It's a universal cream.
Flattering color.
Yeah, it's a universally flattering color, they say.
And then it's you can use it for eyeshadow, blush, and lipstick.
Right. And the piece of makeup is in like an aluminum tin, and so you can pull it out and refill it from this company. And we also have a lot of other cool things. So bamboo toothbrush, we have plastic-free floss, which I didn't realize that most floss is made with plastic.
Makes sense, but
we also have these little, I think they're called go bags, or like snack bags from Stasher. They're these little silicone bags that are awesome. You can freeze them, you can microwave them, all kinds of stuff, and they're really cool. And also coconut scrubbers, so coconut fibers that are really good for scrubbing dishes. And also just a reusable produce bag. So this is a perfect example of what they might look like. And we also have a different kind that's kind of like, what's that?
What company is the produce bag?
It's from Naked, I forgot what it's called. It's like Naked.
You lost me at Naked, Josh. I'm sorry.
Naked something plastic. Well, you should look it up.
I think we
got them from Well Earth Goods, but they're from a company that's something.
Well Earth Goods. Simple Ecology.
There's like a Naked plastic something or other.
And then the last ones that we have are solid shampoo bars, which are
so
awesome.
Good.
I for so long was like, is it gonna really work? It works so well.
Yeah.
So well.
And it works better than
so
regular shampoo. Like especially at least for men. Like I was saying before, I was kind of joking, but we always have like 30-in-1 shampoo things that are like every single thing you can need. And they would always make my scalp itchy and whatnot. But I use Lush, like I only use Lush now, these shampoo bars, which are awesome. And as long as you keep them out of the water or like take them out of the shower once you're done, they last like 2 or 3 months if you use them every day. So they can even last longer if you don't use them every day. And they're so awesome. So we are selling all of these things if anybody's interested.
And so on that note, any questions?
What was the one on the slide?
Oh,
What
yes.
is the one down in the corner?
Bottom left.
Bite.
So these are toothpaste tablets. A big issue with toothpaste is that they always come in a plastic tube. And I think, who was it, Colgate maybe? That just came out with the first plastic tube that is recyclable.
Yeah, that was Colgate.
It is good, but as we know, it's still not the best. And so instead, there are a lot of toothpaste tablets out there, Bite being probably one of the more expensive ones, but there are others as well that make these tablets in a glass jar. You take one, you bite it, chew it, it kind of foams up really nicely, and you brush your teeth. And yeah, and they usually they can come both with or without fluoride. So if you're fluoride sensitive, there's all kinds. So just another really cool example.
Yet another thing that I was skeptical about.
Mhm.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I think it makes my mouth feel way cleaner. And another brand is Hello, and they come in little aluminum cans, and I think you actually can return the cans. But yeah, so that's the journey of plastic. So if anyone has any questions of everything we talked about, Josh and I could go on for a million years, hence our rambling for the past hour. But thank you for bearing with us. And yeah, thanks for being here. Oh, Megan?
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thanks.
What was your favorite part about this microplastics project?
Ooh.
For me, I think it was seeing the students get, excited to feel like they're contributing and making a difference. So going back to the whole thing of why I like talking about plastic, it's that tangible thing we all feel like we have some sort of agency over, which we do. And so seeing students obviously care so much about this issue, and then feeling like not only are they going out and cleaning this environment, but they're also helping provide data that could lead to better ways to manage our water in the future. So that was a really cool feeling, and the fact that this project's going to go on for a long period of time, and that data is only going to grow and become more solid, is a really, really cool feeling.
Yeah. So, well, she kind of stole my, but I agree that it's really cool, especially because a lot of the younger generations I feel like we see nowadays are a lot more cynical than they probably should be. And it's because of all this crazy stuff that's happening, and there's a lot of eco anxiety, things like that. And a lot of students really feel helpless. They tell us that they feel kind of helpless with all this stuff, and so we always try to end our talks with solutions or things they can do to help improve the environment or help make things better. And so just by showing that even they can do the research, even they can participate in ways that they can either discover where plastic is and find ways to kind of reverse that issue, or actually do things like use alternative products or think of creating different ways to remove plastic has just been really amazing.
Yeah, the creativity part of this has been really awesome to see the students kind of flourish in that regard.
Yeah, because like she said, a lot of the students would turn the research we did with them into kind of like senior projects or something like that, and so some of them are really they had their gears spinning finally, which was really cool to see.
Yeah, I know from just hearing from you guys how much you've inspired every student that you've worked with. Has been really beautiful to hear. How excited they're about to make a change or be, you really have, and I feel like you're kind of changing the way we're doing a little bit of research in Colorado in the places that we love. We all love the water, we all love the mountains, and it's right here in our landlocked state. And so I think it's very important to be able to it is a sad issue, but what are we doing to make a solution for it? And
right.
You guys are definitely inspiring the youth to come up and do something about it. So
thank you.
grateful.
Yeah, and it was also really cool just because we were trying to figure out a new research project we could do, and we quickly found that actual peer-reviewed scientific research was not really done very much on microplastics in Colorado. There wasn't a very deep well of data and research on microplastics in Colorado. So we were like, we should do something like this. And so we started it, and we took it right to the kids because that we thought that would be a really good way to get them understanding what the issue is and get them working on this issue that unfortunately it will be up to the next generations to really try to grapple with this. Yeah, and so it's been really cool to do that.
So
Thank you.
Question.
Yeah.
What is your favorite sustainable product?
Ooh, that is a tough one, but I'm gonna have to go with the shampoo bars. I love them. They last so much longer, and I feel like I'm actually using it less frequently because of how well it does a job. And I feel like it's such a quick and easy replacement. investment that's like relatively low cost. Because
Yeah.
some of the other things are like a larger investment, or there may be like, I know I haven't run out of my other floss yet, so I don't want to buy the plastic-free floss because either way it's going to end up in the landfill, so I might as well use it first.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I think that one's my favorite. And then I use the produce bags all the time. So
Yeah.
that's another.
The
Um,
stashers are cool too.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
they're so
And
awesome.
they seal super
Yeah,
well.
Yeah.
they do.
So
Yeah.
yeah, stashers are a good one.
And I would have to say my favorite is probably the makeup. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, if I use it, then yes, it probably
You
would
would
be.
look beautiful with it.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much. It's universally
It's
flattering.
honestly fantastic.
Yeah.
I've stolen.
No, what was I going to say? I think my favorite is probably the laundry detergent sheets.
Oh, that's
Because I just like I was so just jarred by the fact that like Tide Pods are basically encapsulated dissolvable plastic. That just it's crazy. And when the the washing machine drains, it just goes right into waterways essentially. And it's just crazy to think that we're like inputting it, and as well as our dishwasher. So our dishwasher, we sometimes have those little pods that does the same thing. And so there are lots of companies that are making these, either actually eco-friendly pods or that are making things like the eco sheets that I mentioned. And so I think that's really cool.
that's like my house. That's what we use now too.
Yeah.
My roommates are like, this is awesome.
And they clean
it
so
is.
well. They
Yeah.
clean really, really
Do you
well.
guys want to touch on your really cool Boulder Clean, like, conservation, like the bottom of the bottles and what you guys are doing with that?
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
We
so
already-
we talked about it
yeah.
a little bit. But yeah, so I think in a lot of stores and where we don't know exactly.
It's like Whole Foods and Costco's, definitely in Boulder. I want to say like Denver metro area, and then I was trying to get from Jenna, who writes their grants, just like exactly what locations so we can tell our customers where to buy them. But
Right. And I think they're trying to expand to like nationwide, but I'm not sure if that's just yet.
Probably
But
distribution.
Because
Right.
they
but on the
are.
bottom, oh sorry.
Oh
go
no,
ahead.
sorry.
That's what I wanted you guys to highlight a little bit of. It's just like the bottom of them being like specifically designed from Be Clean to
Right.
highlight the endangered species that OFI is working with, and they'll be on the bottom of like it's like a little silicone thing that goes on the bottom of the
kind of
bottle.
like you have a hydro flask, like the little silicone boot or whatever.
Sleeve.
Yeah.
Exactly, because I think they're glass bottles.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
And so I think they have hammerheads on them, and I think a couple other species. And then in that box, and this is the spray bottle specifically, not the laundry sheets, it tells a bit about our story and specifically highlights on our microplastic project. And yeah, so you can help your home and help us at the same time. Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's been a really awesome partnership that's come to light recently. So yeah, thanks for tuning in,
Yeah.
everyone. And thanks to everyone on Zoom that,
Does anybody on Zoom have any questions?
oh yeah, oh,
Yes, Josh,
Yes.
I'm from Georgia.
Oh my
I'm-
goodness.
I'm in the great wasteland. I need all these links.
Oh yes, absolutely. You know what I could probably do? Are you on the newsletter? Do you know?
Probably not.
Okay, I'm just trying to think. So I have like a document that has an entire list of eco-friendly companies that you could buy from, especially in Georgia where you cannot go to a single store probably and find any of those things.
Exactly. So yeah, if you
Yeah.
could send that, that would be cool.
so Ingrid, who works for OF, she is going to post the recording of this with the links. So we'll be able to provide that.
Of course.
With Josh's document, that'd be
Yes.
cool.
Yeah.
Yes, and then also too, those samplers we were talking about, hopefully will be on our company's store at some point too.
Ooh, awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. That'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
All
And
right,
let's see.
thank you, everyone.
Does anybody have any other questions? I mean,
It sounds like Ingrid
okay, I
has
see.
been talking about. Awesome.
Perfect.
Well, thank you all so much for joining.